So I'm 23 years old, female, and I'm currently in a very difficult situation with my mother and stepsister, Shelley, 21. I used to get along fine with my mother. We were not too close, but we were doing well before she met my stepdad, who passed away recently in a car accident. Luckily, Shelley survived the accident, but unfortunately, she was injured pretty badly. My stepdad and my stepsister have been a part of my life from when I was very little. I've never known my biological father since he walked away from my mother before I was even born. From what I know, they were never in a really serious relationship anyway. And when she found out that she was pregnant, he broke up with her because he was not ready to be a father and had advised her to terminate the pregnancy. But she wanted to keep the baby because she had hoped that maybe having a baby would make him stay. However, it did not work that way, and eventually she got stuck with me because her parents would not allow her to terminate the pregnancy. So she had to give birth to me against her wishes, and she has pretty much made sure that I don't ever forget about it. She and I were never able to develop a connection because she had pretty much shut me out ever since I was born. And as a child, I found it very confusing. But after I found out the truth, around the age of 16, things started adding up. I only knew my grandparents on my mother's side of the family, and I would constantly complain to them about how my mother would treat me, but they could only extend their sympathy to me. They never offered to take me in or even speak to my mother about her behavior. And I found that very weird because they would sympathize with me, but never do anything about it. And after I found out exactly why my mother would treat me the way that she did, I started resenting them a little bit too, because they were the ones who had forced my mother to continue with the pregnancy. And that's why she had been treating me this way all my life. After that, I sort of went low contact with my grandparents as well, and that's the way it has been till now. So to sum it up, I don't have a good relationship with my mother. I don't have any relationship with my father, and I don't get along well with my grandparents either. And my stepsister never really liked me, so I never even had a companion either. I guess you could say that I was a pretty lonely child, and I didn't really have anybody to have my back except for my stepfather. And I honestly don't even think of him as my stepfather. I think he was as good as my real father, or even better, so I actually always refer to him as my father. And just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to be continuing to refer to him as my dad in this post as well. So please don't get confused. Anyway, like I said, my dad was the only person who had always been nice to me. My mother started dating him when I was around 3 years old, and when I was 6, they finally got married. By then, I had gotten to know him and my stepsister quite well. Even then, Shelley and I did not particularly get along well, since my mother was always going out of her way to praise Shelley in front of me, but never me. We had been living together for 2 years before the family got married, and to me, it almost had actually taken over everything that used to belong to me, and I needed to say I was kind of jealous of that. It also felt like she had become the apple of my mother's eye all of a sudden, and I had been replaced. So I became very competitive, and I grew up trying to win my mother over. But in a few years, I kind of accepted that it was probably never going to happen. However, the only person who supported me through all of this was my dad. He always made it clear to me that he loved me and was proud of me, and never, ever acted like I was not his own flesh and blood. He treated both Shelley and I just the same, unlike my mother, and he had absolutely no biases. Him and I got along well, and thankfully my mother and Shelley did not try to ruin that for us, which was quite surprising, but I was glad. Anyway, that's the kind of home that I grew up in. But just one person who always had my back, And after I found out why my mother would treat me that way, he was the person that I had confided in. And he told me that he would try to talk to my mother. But that backfired because the very next day there was a huge fight in the house, and my mother accused me of trying to turn her family against her and called me a bunch of horrible names. That was pretty hurtful. And my dad tried to apologize to me for it, but it was not his fault. So I told him that I was fine with it. And honestly, by then, I was used to this kind of treatment. So I just told him that I did not have to stay at home for long anyway, since I would be moving out for college pretty soon. And then I wouldn't have to deal with any of this. So it was just a couple of years. And I was ready to put up with whatever it took until then. After I moved away for college, my father was the one who paid for me, not even expecting me to pay him back. And I thought that was really sweet of him. Honestly, it was not like my mother would be able to cover my college tuition since she had been a stay-at-home mom ever since she married my father. I had also gone out of contact with my grandparents, so I could not take money from them. So he stepped up and covered my tuition. However, after I left to go to college, my mother went no contact with me. She just told me that she did not want me to come back because apparently I had been a burden on her for her entire life, and she just wanted to live for herself now and be with the people that she actually wanted around her, which happened to be Shelley and my dad. She told me that she never felt connected to me, and everything to do with me just reminded her how much better her life would have been if she had never met my biological father and had me. And now that I was 18, she did not have to take on my responsibility anymore since I was not a minor. So now we were going to go our separate ways, and she hoped that I would respect it and not try to establish contact with her ever again. She put it all in an email after I had already left and moved into my college, and it came as a huge shock to me. So I immediately called my father up and talked to him about it, and he told me that he had no idea that this was happening. He said that he was going to contact my mom about it, but I told him not to because that would just put a strain on their relationship, and that's not something that I wanted to do. Honestly, I was just relieved that I would not have to maintain any sort of relationship with my mother anymore. Because all my life, it has been stressful for me to live with her, that I was not wanted. And now she had given me a way to get out of it, and I was taking that way out. The only thing that was sad was that I would not be able to see my father as often as I thought I would be able to. However, we were able to work around it, and we just decided that we would continue to meet whenever I had holidays or wanted to come back home, and he would make sure that my mother never found out about it. So that's the way that it had been for the past couple of years, and I had maintained contact with my father. But then, about 1 month ago, I lost him in a car accident that spared my stepsister, but not him. They were coming back after visiting Shelley's grandparents, but my mother had a bit of a cold, so she had sat this one out. And while they were returning, unfortunately, the roads were too slippery due to the heavy snowfall the previous night. So they lost control of the car and went off track, which ended in a really bad way for them. My mother only contacted me a couple of days before the funeral service, and I rushed back home as quickly as I could. I was completely devastated because it felt like I had lost the only family that I had. The funeral was a solemn affair, and after I was done with my eulogy, I just left without even bothering to wait to say goodbye to my mother or Shelley. My mother and I did not interact even once during that whole time because she was kind of busy and I was too shocked to say anything to her. And we haven't even been in contact for the last couple of years. So it seemed pointless for me to fake niceties and try to give her my condolences. She had done her part by telling me about the accident and my father's demise, and I had done my part by showing up. That was it. We did not need to try and act like mother and daughter again because I knew that this accident was not going to make us any closer. So you can imagine my surprise when a couple of days ago she told me that she wanted to talk to me. And when I called her, she apologized for everything and asked me to move in with her because she needed my help. My life is pretty different now from what it was a couple of years ago. I was still in college back when she had first cut me off, but now I have an apartment of my own. I have a stable job, and even though I work from home, it's still all mine. I don't have to depend on anybody for anything, and I don't have to think about anyone before I do stuff. So I had to pause and think about whether I wanted to take her up on that offer or not, because on one hand, I knew that both of us had been through a tremendous amount of grief and we were still in mourning. So maybe it would make it easier for both of us to deal with what we were going through, because I am pretty lonely right now since I feel like I've lost the most important person in my life. And I know she feels the same way. There was another reason she was calling, and it was because she wanted somebody to be there for her and help her with taking care of Shelley. They had limited resources right now, and she couldn't afford to hire a full-time nurse, so she was the one who was going to have to do all the household chores since Shelley was really injured and could barely even move. She was still plastered all over, and it would take her a long time to get back on her feet. So hiring a nurse was out of the question since they had to be very frugal about their money right now. My mother also had to start looking for a job since now she would have to be the breadwinner for the family since Shelley had just graduated and she couldn't exactly start working in this condition. And that's why she needed my help, because she couldn't do all of this alone. I told her back then that I needed a couple of days to think, but yesterday I finally decided I was going to go and help her out. Because honestly, I was sick of holding grudges, and I just really needed somebody to be there for me emotionally because I live alone and the grief had been weighing on me. It's really difficult to lose a parent and lose them so young. I don't even know how to put into words how terrible it feels. And knowing that my mother and Shelley, no matter what kind of people they were going through the same kind of grief, and that made me want to reconsider my stance about living with them. I did not think of it as them trying to use me, but I thought that we could all collectively deal with our emotions and try to be with family. And that's how I was looking at it and trying to put a positive spin on it. So I spoke to my landlord and told him that I would see how it goes for a couple of weeks, and then I left. When I reached their place yesterday, I found their greeting to be very strange. I had expected them to be happy to see me, but instead, both my mother and Shelley looked like they did not seem to care for me. They did not even welcome the warmth that I had expected, even though my mother had literally apologized to me on the phone for everything that had happened in the past. As soon as I reached, my mom handed me a list of chores and told me that I had to get started because she was already really exhausted and needed me to start working alongside her. I thought that she was going to be working as well, so I did not argue with her and I started doing the dishes. After I was done with the dishes, I went into my father's office to dust certain things because I don't think anybody had bothered to clean it after he had asked. And I'm so thankful that I chose to do that on my own accord, because that's where I found certain documents that I will come to later. Once I was done with that, I came back into the living room, but then I realized that my mother was not working at all. She was just sitting on the couch and relaxing while gossiping with Shelley. I had assumed that she would be doing something as well and we would be splitting the work. But after that, I realized that she was expecting me to do everything that was on the list. So I confronted her about it because I was really pissed off, and I told her that I was here because she had said that she needed help, but I was not here to be her servant and I was not going to do all the work. Shelley and my mom then looked at each other and then told me that I was being really heartless because my mother was getting older and Shelley obviously couldn't work. So it was natural that all the work would come to me instead. Not only that, they then had the audacity to go on and tell me that now that I was living with them, I would also have to pay my share of the rent. They told me that I would need to cough up $3,000 for the rent, and that's when I completely lost it. Now, coming to the papers that I had found in my dad's office, I think my mother had tried her very best to hide those papers, but I found them. She had kept that document at the very bottom of a set of really heavy books and had hoped that nobody would ever be able to find it. But when I went in to clean, I decided to go through his stuff and found a brown file with my name on it. When I opened it, I was shocked to find that it contained my father's will. Previously, we had all been told that he had never even bothered to prepare a will because he had passed away in an accident, and before that, he had never felt the need to prepare one, which I found a bit strange because my father was a planner, and it seemed out of character for him to not take such precautions. Along with the will, he left me a letter saying that he was hoping that I would be the one to find it and open it because I was the only person he really trusted, because he knew that I would always be honest and never do anything to break that. And he said that he did love my mother and my stepsister, but he was not sure that they wouldn't mind a bit of dishonesty to keep everything to themselves, which is why he had left these documents to me and wanted me to make sure that everything was executed according to this. This was pretty interesting because according to his will, that he had written it himself and then even gotten it registered with his lawyer, I was going to receive a decent amount of money and the vacation house that they had, while my mother and Shelley would get to keep the house that they were staying in and everything else that belonged to them previously. It was completely fair and just, exactly what I had expected of my father, and it also exposed the fact that this house legally belonged to my father, so there was no need for rent. However, the only problem was that before this would have been brought up, and my mother and my father's lawyer had told us that he had never prepared one. But as soon as I found out that, I knew that the two of them had probably teamed up and lied to all of us so that I wouldn't get anything. When my mother told me that she wanted me to pay $3,000 for rent, I brought up those documents and I asked them that since my father had left this house to them, it did not even make sense for them to ask me for rent. So we could split it because there was nothing to split. There was no landlord. And the two of them had the audacity to tell me that they were not asking me to split the rent. They were just asking me to pay rent. They had lied initially so that I would not feel like part of the family, but now that I had discovered the document anyway, they did not mind it. My mother told me that just because I had agreed to help out with taking care of Shelley and everything else, it did not mean that I was exempted from the rules. And if I was going to be living with them, I had to contribute, and they wanted me to pay $3,000 every month just to live with them, which they had requested. My mother also told me that I was not allowed to take that to my father's lawyer because the two of them had a deal, just like I had guessed, and he was getting a cut from my mother and whatever inheritance she got from my father, and they were going to keep that will a secret because she did not think that my father had done the right thing by splitting everything so soon between the two of us, and she wanted to keep it all to herself. And when she passed away, she would make her own, and then we would have whatever we wanted. I knew what her plan was. She intended to keep everything for herself, and when she made her own will, she would leave everything to Shelley and nothing to me, which is why she did not think that my dad had done the right thing by splitting everything, because why would she want anything to be fair? Anyway, she told me to wait because everything that had belonged to my father previously was now hers. As soon as those words came out of my mouth, I told her that I was leaving and I was taking those documents with me since she had not even done a lot of work to prevent me from finding it. Not only was I leaving, submitting this and making sure that it was executed, but I was also moving out and making sure that they never spoke to me again. I left the house with my bags and the document, and they tried to physically fight me for it. But I got out of there as fast as I could and went back home. Now I have contacted a lawyer, and we are going to make sure that things are done the way that my father had wanted. But after I left, my mother and Shelley started sending me messages and told me that they knew the only reason I had even come to their side to help them out was because I actually wanted to see if there was really no way. And now that I had it, I only cared about my inheritance, and they knew the truth. They called me vile and greedy, and I can't believe they are even insinuating this, especially after my mother tried to cover up what she was doing. They think that I'm being selfish by going through with the execution of the will, and the reason that they actually wanted to hide it was apparently because my mother would need everything, all the resources and the money, to be able to pay for whatever Shelley needed in the future, because now she was not going to be able to work until she healed completely from her injuries, and they were probably going to fall short of money as well. So that's why they had hidden and did not want me to find it and have it executed. They think that I should stop the process and let things be, just for Shelley's sake. But I don't know if that's the right thing to do. I told him that I was not going to stop the proceedings since I thought that my dad did the right thing and his will should be executed. So as of now, they are really doubling down on the claims that I am being a terrible human being and that I have absolutely no regard for my mother and Shelley. AITA, because I want my late father's will to be executed. Update 1. Hi, thanks for the response to my post. I am going through with the proceedings. I was going to go through with it anyway. This post here was just to make sure that I was doing the right thing. And now that I know that I am, I have no reason to back down. My mother and Shelley can think whatever they want of me. It hardly matters to me anymore. The ones who were really selfish, not me. My mother was actually even trying to commit fraud, since I know that's what counts when you try to do things like that. I can't even believe that my dad's lawyer, who actually happens to be a pretty good friend of his, was also willing to be a part of it and be an accomplice. I don't know how it did not occur to me first. I guess I was just really stressed out. But once I realized that what they had tried to do was actually illegal and that I could report them for it, I decided to use it in my favor. I was not actually going to report them because honestly, it's not worth the time and trouble. But I just told my mother, I texted her back and said that if she had asked me any longer, I was going to make sure that I brought this to the notice of the cops, that we had earlier been told that there was no way. But then all of a sudden, we found one, especially after everyone had been promised that they had looked for something tangible and found nothing. My dad's lawyer had even gotten it registered along with him, so there was no way that he did not know, and it seemed unlikely that it would just slip his mind since this was literally his job. I guess you could call it blackmail, but I don't really care what she did. I'm just trying to preserve my energy and time. So anyway, I told her that I was going to expose her and my dad's lawyer if they did not back down. And so begrudgingly, she was forced to promise me that she would stop harassing me and wouldn't even contest the will after the probate. So that's out of the way, and things are going to be done the way that my father had intended them to be done. Update 2. Hey, so now that the will is going to be executed, the probate has begun, and it's going to take about 6 or 7 months, or maybe even more. But eventually, I'm hoping that I do inherit things that my father had left to me. He had split everything equally between the three of us, and I'm really glad that he did. My mother and Shelley have blocked me. It's been 2 weeks since I came back home from their place, and I don't know what they're up to. It can't be anything good because I'm guessing the silence is the calm before the storm. But I'm sure that they will not just take this and say nothing about it. I'm pretty certain that my mother is really pissed off about my threat and that they are going to lose a lot of money. Imagine how angry she must be. But they dug this grave for themselves. Honestly, if they had asked me for money politely and respectfully, I might have even helped them out. But they deserve this now. Anyway, I have started therapy because I think I need that to deal with the grief of my father's loss. All things aside, I still really miss him, and it's just really difficult to deal with. I had something to keep myself occupied for the past couple of days, but I don't think anger towards my mom and Shelley is a good replacement for grief. And I want to deal with things the healthy way, so that's why I'm going to therapy. I just hope everything works out for me. Update 3. Hi, so a couple of weeks have passed, and a few days ago I heard from a couple of relatives that my mother and Shelley were going around spreading some rumors about me. Apparently, every time they would speak to somebody who was just trying to check in on them and not even trying to stir up drama, they would start talking about me. They were telling people that I had visited them a couple of weeks ago of my own accord. This is obviously not true. They were the ones who had called me over, and I even have screenshots to prove it, which I have sent to the people who had bothered to contact me. Anyway, they have been telling people that I visited them, and I had told them that I wanted to help out with money and take care of Shelley since she was really, really badly injured and couldn't do much for herself. And my innocent and clueless mother naively thought that I was actually there to help out, and she let me stay with them for a couple of hours. But that amount of time was enough for me to go looking for a will. And when I found it, she accused everybody of hiding it from us so they could keep everything to themselves, even though my mother had known there was a will. She was claiming that she did not want anything, which is why she had never gone looking for a will. But I, being the selfish and cunning person that I am, discovered it within seconds. And as soon as I had found it, I was out of the house. So she was basically painting me out to be the kind of person who was doing exactly what she had been trying to do, being a gold digger who only cared about my dad's money and what he had left to me as an inheritance. Anyway, I'm not even bothered, and I'm not going to set the record straight. The relatives who bothered to reach out to me, I told them the truth. They could do what they wanted to with that. I'm in therapy right now, and I'm just trying to focus on myself. None of this rubbish. So my mom can go around lying as much as she wants to. It's not going to change the facts. I'm glad that I'm done with all of this, and I'm never going to look back. Stay tuned for more stories from Argo Relationships.